history, the very edifice, the very foundation of the Church of Scientology.
But is it possible that what they are defending is yet another Aleister Crowleyan satanic cult?
Do you ever think that you might be quite mad?
Oh, yes.
Scientology has at times come under the scrutiny of the secular news media, but the stark truth has not yet been told. That Scientology is in a way another fruit of the teachings of Satanist Aleister Crowley is barely known. Few people realize that Scientology's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, was yet another disciple of Aleister Crowley's who referred to Crowley as his good friend.
A magician, the magic cults of the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries in the Middle East were fascinating. The only modern work that has anything to do with them is trifle wild in spots, but it's fascinating work in itself, and that's work written by Aleister Crowley, the late Aleister Crowley, my very good friend. And he did himself a splendid piece of aesthetics built around those magic cults. It's very interesting reading to get a hold of a copy of the book, quite rare, but it can be obtained, The Master Thurion, Therion, The Master Thurion by Aleister Crowley. He signs himself The Beast, the Mark of the Beast, 666.
Hubbard stated that Scientology's basic idea paralleled Crowley's doctrine of do what thou wilt. He stated, our whole activity tends to make an individual completely independent of any limitations. Aleister Crowley had some interesting things to say about this. He wrote the Book of the Law. L. Ron Hubbard's oldest son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., who witnessed his father's discipleship under Crowley, admitted his father was a Satanist and a follower of Crowley.
Well, the funny thing is that the actual truth is about as far out as Scientology itself. Really, the basis of Scientology, which is rather hidden and covered over, is the occult, the deep involvement with satanic powers. That he felt that he was deeply involved with a British black magician called Aleister Crowley, and through putting himself in deep hypnotic trances and the use of drugs on himself, he wanted to become the most powerful being in the world.
L. Ron Jr. stated that, like Leary, L. Ron Sr. felt that he was helping to complete Crowley's mission. L. Ron Hubbard Jr. stated that his father considered himself to be the one who, quote, came after, and that he was Crowley's successor and had taken on the mantle of the great beast. Scientology actually began on December 1st, 1947. This was the day Aleister Crowley died. It appears that Hubbard believed that Scientology would be instrumental in building Antichrist's kingdom and seeking to destroy Christ at his coming. In a document alleged by many former Scientologists to be written to OT8s, the highest level of Scientology, Hubbard declared, quote, my mission could be said to fulfill the biblical promise represented by the brief Antichrist period. During this period, there is a fleeting opportunity for the whole scenario to be effectively derailed, which would make it impossible for the mass Maccabean landing or second coming to take place. The second coming is designed, among other things, to trigger a rapid series of destructive events. L. Ron Hubbard was close to Jack Parsons, who was a rocket scientist and co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Parsons and Hubbard worked together to produce a moonchild through Crowley's sex magic, which they hoped to be the Antichrist. Before Parsons was killed in an explosion in his laboratory, he wrote a book called The Book of the Antichrist. In this book, he called for the destruction of, quote, the Black Brotherhood called Christianity. And he stated that the Antichrist would bring all men to the law of the beast, 666, and in his law I shall conquer the world. Aleister Crowley was a deceiver who lied to his followers by promising them freedom and all the while bringing them into satanic slavery. While Crowley claimed that his followers would be free through the practice of do what thou wilt, they were actually brought into satanic bondage, the worst kind of slavery and non-freedom in existence. Notice how Crowley's doctrine of thelema, or will, was really a subtle way of enslaving his followers to Satan. Crowley taught, quote, they must accept the book of the law as the word and the letter of truth and the sole rule of life. They must acknowledge the authority of the beast, 666, and of the scarlet woman, as in the book it is defined. He said they must accept their will as constituting the will of the whole order, whatever happened to do what thou wilt, right? He stated they must accept the crown and conquering child as the Lord of the eon and exert themselves to establish his reign upon the earth. In the end, Aleister Crowley was totally deceived. He died hopelessly addicted to heroin and enslaved to Satan. Witnesses declared that his last words before his death were, quote, "I am perplexed," and, quote, "sometimes I hate myself." Crowley himself had been totally deceived by Satan as he was led to believe that he himself would be the Antichrist. And now he was on the verge of death, not having realized his twisted dream. He was said to be very depressed before his death and extraordinarily fearful. Crowley knew that it was time for him to face his Creator whom he had so mocked, and he knew that the Scripture stated it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, and that our God is a consuming fire. Crowley was heard pacing before his death until he finally collapsed and met his horrible end in hell. Sadly, he is taking millions of people to hell with him as the father of modern culture and as the patron devil of rock and roll.
With what's going on with Doctor Strange, the new movie, and we're showing in our upcoming expose that Doctor Strange is basically Aleister Crowley, made in the image of Satanist Aleister Crowley, basically the same origin story. And a writer writes, one of the main writers of his story is a member of Crowley's OTO and brings the magic in and so forth. And they made it very Crowleyan, which people see when they watch that video. But it's interesting that his counterpart is the Scarlet Witch, right? Or I should say the Scarlet Woman, maybe, right? Because Crowley has what he called the Scarlet Woman. The Scarlet Witch in the new Strange movie practices chaos magic. You look at chaos magic in Wikipedia, just type in chaos magic, just even go to Wikipedia. You'll see it was originated in part by Aleister Crowley. And it's just the crazy thing is the first incarnation, as we show in this video, of Doctor Strange is none other than Dr. Droom. I always try to point out not Dr. Doom without an R, but Dr. Droom as in broom, but with a D, D-R-O-O-M. And you can look it up right now. You don't have to wait for a video to come out. You'll see Dr. Droom, bald-headed dude. Look at Aleister Crowley in his famous bald-headed pictures, the same dude, right? But then they wanted to bring him back, and they brought him back in the form of Dr. Druid, gave him a little bit of hair on the sides. They wanted to bring him back again, and they brought him back in the form of Doctor Strange, same origin story, right, in the Marvel Comics. What's crazy about all this is people tripped out. I go, look, who does he look at? I was showing this to Tony, and he's like the spitting image of Jack Parsons, who was the top Crowleyan, most probably notorious Crowleyan Satanist in America, because Jack Parsons is a crater on the dark side of the moon named after him. Jack Parsons is the founder of modern rocketry. He's the one, when you see the capsule, you see the fuel, the liquid fuel that he designed and the different compartments and so forth, that came from him. He was a genius, a demonic genius, by the way, and he was channeling a lot of stuff. And it's interesting with Jack Parsons, he was installed by Satanist Aleister Crowley as the head of the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, in Pasadena, California, about 45 minutes from us. And he put him as the head of that group. By the way, this guy is the co-founder, Jack Parsons, of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory of NASA. Okay? This is crazy stuff, right? So anyway, Jack Parsons is working with L. Ron Hubbard. Before L. Ron Hubbard starts Scientology, and they're trying to bring forth a moon child. First, they're doing magical incantations to get hold of a scarlet woman and have her materialize. And he meets a woman named Cameron, who will later marry. I'm talking about Jack Parsons now. And then they start doing magical incantations, sex magic, to bring forth an ethereal spirit being, a demon really, to come into her body and bring forth, which some of them would hope would be the Antichrist. Well, it's very interesting when I'm going to read a little bit more of what L. Ron Hubbard said in a little bit. When we get into that, we're going to see that he hoped to be the Antichrist. It's crazy. Jack Parsons wrote a book. You can read it online called The Book of the Antichrist by Jack Parsons. So it's really, really interesting when you see how this ties together. And we see with their own words what they're saying about this coming, Maccabic landing to defeat Christ and install the kingdom of Antichrist. It would be something that I'd imagine that, Tom Cruise being one of the leaders there would be very privy to. But, who knows? And this is L. Ron Hubbard writing. By the time, allegedly, right, this could have been written after he was dead, just following through on his vision, because when you keep in mind, L. Ron Hubbard was working with Jack Parsons, trying to bring forth a scarlet woman. She ends up showing up in the form of Cameron, at least they interpret it that way. And then now Parsons is trying to bring forth a spirit child through her to rule the world. And he writes a book called The Book of the Antichrist. Here's L. Ron Hubbard. And by the way, he kind of stabbed Parsons in the back and went and started his own group. L. Ron Hubbard says, by the time you read this, I will no longer be occupying the body and identity that you have known as Ron. And it's 4 pages, right? Almost 4 pages. So I'm going to skip a little bit here and there. Otherwise, we'd be here for 20 minutes. I want to get this done in 4 or 5 minutes because it's crazy stuff. He says, what follows is a story that has been withheld for reasons which will soon be obvious. I mean, he's letting the secret out, what they're really about in Scientology, right? Keep in mind, this is the group that Tom Cruise belongs to. He goes, until such a time as there were enough OTs, right, operative thetans, that something could be done about it. He says, some 80 odd million years ago, which is ridiculous. How does he know that, right? It's stupid, right? Read the book of Genesis. He says, some 80 odd million years ago, Earth time, he says that plans were drawn by a group of outside the messed universe for the eventual takeover of a good portion of this universe. So there were these evil plans being drawn up to take over, great portions of the universe. And this is going to be done by those claiming to represent Christ, right? They're evil. He says they conceived of an ongoing implant, something to implant in you, some portions of which have been faithfully rendered in parts of the Bible. This implant, laid in by carefully controlled genetic mutation, makes it effectively impossible for beings on the more heavily affected planets, such as Earth, to become free. It causes progressive genetic evolution that gives the subject population greater and greater susceptibility to the telepathic impingement and direction of the controllers. In other words, the Bible talks about, and you're going to see it's about Christ's second coming, and this is really an evil race of alien entities, which he calls the Macrobaic, or the evil confederacy of alien entities, who are actually going to try to take over the planet, and they've used the Bible. So those who follow the Bible are being trained to accept this person, Christ, but really it's a deception. And we're the saviors, Scientology, that will fight against Christ. I mean, the aliens, right?
Oh, you're saying that's not, one of the hadiths or something from Islam.
No.
Okay, just making
sure.
sure.
Sounds a lot like the hadiths, right? No kidding, Chad. No doubt you're familiar. Check out what L. Ron Hubbard writes, or at least according to Scientology, to OT8 was L. Ron Hubbard. No doubt you are familiar with the Revelations section of the Bible. Wow. Where various events are predicted. Also mentioned is a brief period of time in which an arch enemy of Christ, right? An arch enemy of Christ, referred to as the Antichrist, will reign and his opinions will have sway. All this makes for very fantastic, entertaining reading, but there is truth in it. This Antichrist represents the forces of Lucifer, literally the light bearer or light bringer. Wow. So he's saying, wow, there's this Antichrist period the book of Revelation talks about, represents Lucifer, the light bearer. But by the way, he thinks that's good.
No, that's Masonic. We're just getting it all in, aren't we?
Yeah, we're getting the Masonry in here too, right? My mission can be said to fulfill the biblical promise represented by this brief Antichrist period. Folks, he's saying straight out, but the book of the Revelation has some truth in it, and it talks about this coming Antichrist period, and that's us. That's Scientology, But he's saying, but really it's a good thing, as you'll see in a moment. And the bad thing is Christ coming back, because that's really the aliens. Christ is the bad thing. Us, as the Antichrist period being prophesied, is really a good thing. He goes on to say, during this period, there is a fleeting opportunity for the whole scenario, that is Christ's second coming, to be effectively derailed. What are they doing in Revelation chapter 17? Kings of the earth gather together with the Antichrist to fight against Christ at his second coming, try to derail it. Well, that just doesn't happen. That's been getting, brothers and sisters, that's been set up for years by the prince and the power of the air, the spirit, as Chad was noting, that works through the children of disobedience. The spirits that go forth to the kings of the earth to bring them to fight against Christ. And here we see in these cults, and I'm trying to show you guys, whether it's Masonry, whether it's Scientology, a number of cults, they're being fed satanic teaching to ultimately, many of them, to fight against truth and God's righteousness in the end. And ultimately, he's teaching right here to fight against Christ at the second coming. So he says, during this period, there's a fleeting opportunity for the whole scenario, that is Christ's second coming, to be effectively derailed, which would make it impossible for the mass Maccabean landing, and the Maccabeans, that evil confederacy landing, supposedly, and then in parentheses, second coming, okay? Really he's talking, to take place. Then he goes on to say the second coming of Christ, he's talking about, the second coming is designed, among other things, to trigger a rapid series of destructive events. He says a little further down, and to bring about eventual enslavement of mankind. So he's saying what? These aliens are using the Bible to program people with engrams and to basically, through evolution, to make happy slaves of all humans when Christ comes. But guess what? L. Ron Hubbard, right? Who's practicing Crowley's magic, right? A Satanist, right? A guy that was having sex with kids. We proved that in our videos, and just he inverts it all, right? He's saying this is good stuff. We're trying to stop Christ. He says, and we're trying to stop Christ, who he says will bring about the eventual enslavement of mankind. As you know, and he mentions the Buddha, he never claimed to be anything more than a man. Having caught on to this operation, he postulated his own return as Maitreya. Mm-hmm. Sound familiar? Now we're talking about the New Age movement. Now I got the New Age movement, man. It's getting all pulled together. And he's saying it's a good thing, which is really the Antichrist, the real Antichrist kingdom. And he's admitting he'd identify with the Antichrist kingdom already, right? Having caught on to this operation, he postulated his own return as Maitreya, part of which prophecy will have been fulfilled upon the passing of L. Ron Hubbard. In other words, he's the reincarnation of Buddha, and then you're going to see he's going to come back again to be this Antichrist figure, okay? For those of you whose Christian toes I may have stepped on, let me take the opportunity to disabuse you of some lovely myths. For instance, the historic Jesus, he writes, was not nearly the sainted figure that he's been made out to be. In addition to being a lover of young boys, that's what he's writing to his followers, calling Jesus a pedophile. Not a shred of evidence of that. In fact, that's blasphemy. A ton of evidence that Crowley had orgies with little kids drawn in his big, giant bedroom, okay? And he was a pedophile. And he writes about that kind of stuff as well. He goes, in addition to him being a lover of young boys and men, he was given to an uncontrollable burst of temper and hatred that belied the general message of love, understanding, and other typical macabre PR, public relations. So isn't this quite interesting? So in just about 4 or less pages, there's mass propaganda here, condition his people to identify with the Antichrist in the book of Revelation and come against Christ. He goes, it's a good joke that the Galactic Confederacy, these are supposedly the good guys, is associated with the serpent in the garden, the beast, and other emissaries of the Prince of Darkness. What is it? Why? Why is that a joke? You just said that you identify with the Antichrist mission, and that's Scientology's mission. You talked about your good friend, Aleister Crowley, who signed himself the Beast 666, and you gloried in it. He's a full-blown liar. And he goes on to write, I will soon leave this world only to return and complete my mission with another identity. Now, of course, L. Ron Hubbard is not going to come back and complete any mission. The Bible says the point of man wants to die, but after this, the judgment. But what Satan is doing through him and through Scientology is greasing the skids, apparently, to receive the Antichrist. He goes on to say, although I long to stretch my arms back in repose on some distant star in some distant galaxy. You can't do that when you're in hell, Mr. Hubbard. It appears that that is one dream that will have to wait. But my return depends on people like you doing these materials, meaning following Scientology, giving all your money to them and becoming slaves of Scientology, thoroughly and completely, so that there will be a genetically uncontaminated body for me to pick up and resume where I left off, a body free of religious mania, right, wrong, dichotomy, and synthetic karma. So he's getting away from the concept of right and wrong, right? Mr. Do what thou wilt, the Antichrist will be the man of lawlessness, the son of perdition, right? And the last page, I'll just read a couple little quotes. There are regions, even in isolated parts of the Milky Way, where poets are free to poet, and magicians can paint reality with their magic wands and exteriorize without body kickback. But these areas, unfortunately, are fewer and fewer. I will return not as a religious leader, meaning as the leader of Scientology, but as a political one, right? He's hoping that he would be the coming Antichrist, just as Crowley hoped he would be, just as Parsons seems to have maybe hoped he would be, or at least bring him forth through a moonchild, perhaps. He says, I will effectively postpone, someone when he comes back, then halt a series of events designed to make happy slaves of us all. So there you have it, the secret that I have kept close to my chest all these years. Wow.